everybody. Welcome to the First Do Table Talk podcast. I'm Eddie Buchanan, your host. On this show, we have candid conversations with fire service leaders about technology, about operations, about culture. And today's guest is Amanda Champion. Amanda is the Vice President of Business Strategy for Training, Records Management Systems, and Learning Management Systems with us here at First Do. I've actually known Amanda for many, many years. She is a rock star when it comes to training programs and training management systems. And she's been doing this for over 20 years, working behind the scenes. A lot of the things that you probably have seen related to online training and training management systems, it's a strong chance she probably had something to do with it in the background. So we're really excited to have her on the show today. So pull up a chair and let's get to it. Amanda Champion, thank you for coming on the show. Thanks for pulling up a chair.
So excited to be here. Thanks for letting me be one of the first few guests.
It's really exciting. We've known each other for a minute or two.
Yep.
So it's exciting that we both ended up on the same team, eventually. That's pretty awesome.
I couldn't send you a Teams message faster, right?
Yeah.
I was like, hey, you're here. Let's get to work.
Yeah, for the audience that doesn't know, so when I first started at First Do, you have orientation and you get an email, and so you're just, showing up to class. And I get there and Amanda's there. I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. It's fantastic.
Yeah, because we've connected along the way many a times. We've talked specifically about training and your background a few times and things we were working on, and now forging forward together. I just love it.
It's amazing. We've got all kinds of talent over here on the team now. It's pretty awesome. It is
the truth. I think that's the biggest piece about what's setting us apart right now. The pace at which we move and the people that we have. People are everything. Yep.
What are you doing? Tell us about your role at First Do and what you're working on.
Yeah. So primarily responsible for our training module, which includes tracking and documenting training to the LMS, right? We brought up and set up an online training platform. I was going to say this year, but it's last year in 2025. And we've got a suite of content partners. And now just helping make training smarter, easier to adopt and stand up, because you and I just did that webinar. We were talking about how do you get a training program off the ground. And I think that's the biggest piece for so many people, and tying it to all their different things they have to track, be responsible for, keep people on the right path to maintaining compliance. We're going to do that in a smarter, better, more strategic way.
Well, so what is I've known you through different camps. Tell me about your career path, how you snaked, how did you get involved with fire training in the first place? And then what happened between, over that 20 years or however long it was?
Yeah, it has been a long time. I love to reflect at the beginning of the year. And I actually have core memories thinking of when I was saying, oh, it's been 5 years, 7 years, 10 years. And that was in comparison to folks in the service who have 10, 20, 30 years, right? But now I'm going on 18 years working with fire and rescue professionals, specifically in a training capacity. I fell into it. Literally, a business that I was at was acquiring a smaller mom and pop that trained fire rescue professionals. And I think it was EMS World. It could have been EMS Today. And they said, hey, can you go to this conference? And then I did, of course, fell in love with it and the people in the industry. And then it was like, all right, you're gonna own the business and you're going to help us figure this out. So fell into it and just haven't left. Yeah.
What do you think is the greatest? I don't know. I want to say that you've been probably working behind the scenes more than anybody when we start talking about technology and fire training. It's like an LMS or a learning management system, if you're not familiar with the acronyms, and RMS or records management systems. Yeah. What was it like when you first got involved with that versus what you see the capabilities today?
Yeah, and people probably know more today what an LMS is, but training management, right? Training program. So in reflection, when I first got into this, we still had some boxes of VHS tapes, right? But it was mostly DVD. There were still a lot of departments, some big departments that I can think of off the top of my head, that were having DVDs shipped to them for their EMS CE. At the time, the group I was with didn't have a lot of their own fire training. They're more published with in alignment with the publishers like Nifster, Jones, and Bartlett, whose real focus is what they do best, publishing books. So we pivoted and then got into the space of developing fire and compliance training. But it was DVDs and then getting into the online training space. And there was a huge adoption at that time. The fire service has been great about adopting online training, more so than some of their other counterparts in public safety who focus more on like higher ed for promotional purposes. At that time, I think content was viewed as a commodity. Big pivot point for us to today. If we think about today, content, good content, quality content, having content for all those topics that we have to train on is so critical. So that's a huge differentiator from back then to now. Content was just check the box. But the tech was viewed as good. And I think now, from then to now, fast forward, departments and agencies are just screaming for something better. It was what they're doing is just the same as what it was back then. So big changes from that perspective. But I remember, I think it was 2011, I put a partnership in place with Firehouse Software. So it was always connected to the records management side of things because it had to see the bigger picture. So that was always the goal. Coming here, the leadership said, "Do you have a vision?" It's like, "Yep, I got that." They said, "Let's go," right? So that's what we're going to be doing now is connecting all of the daily operations to training. And again, it's so much more than what it was before. Everyone's asking to do more. Maybe that's post-COVID, but.
Well, that certainly did change the game, didn't it? I mean, gosh, I remember the first time I had any interaction with the LMS was Blackboard. And it was for our fire department, right? Like, so. Right. We went to, I remember I got sent to a training session in D.C., and it was me, the only fire guy in the room. There was military, a lot of military there, and a lot of academic, universities and stuff were there to learn how to use Blackboard. And I was like the only fire guy, and they all looked at me like, "What are you doing here?" And I was like, "Well, we need it. We need stuff too, and it was kind of interesting to watch it evolve to what it is today. But I think you're right. I don't know that much is changed. I mean, it's we're I guess we're more accustomed to learning management systems and distance education and hybrid training and that kind of stuff. Well, where do you think we are? What's the state of the world today as far as RMS systems go? Do you think are we at any kind of baseline that you could articulate? How are we?
Yeah,
compared to other things.
So I think training records has evolved, right? If you think back again to when we started, it was like, oh gosh, people are on paper. And we still hear that. We still hear that to a certain extent, but everything is more accessible. So I think training records has been more consistent because back then people were adopting online technology, records management systems were more accessible. So that made it easier to accumulate records. But in our webinar, we actually saw that, right? So after low engagement being the number one challenge that departments are facing, I think the second was incomplete records or inaccurate records, right? Because we're asking people to do so much. If you work at a busy station, you're going from one call to the next. By the time you get back to your station to do that report, you've already lost what you're thinking about. So again, I think it's same thing with training. We've got to get them better ways to do things in the moment, in the field, using AI, using voice to text to convert what it is about that narrative that they're doing, whether that's for ISO documentation purposes or anything. So I think that from a training perspective, people are looking for us to make moves. And I'll use EMS as an example. We've got to move to a competency-based model. If I think about training, we're still working in, fire is almost easy in comparison because we've got our NFPA standard, we've got our authorities having jurisdiction, often the fire chief saying, okay, here's what we can do for training needs, and you can just kind of go on your way. On the EMS side, it's so much more complicated, even though we have CAPC, which is a great partner of ours and a great organization. EMS requirements, this is why no one wants to be in training because they can't keep it all straight. So I think I would love to see training records and like training programs move to something that's more competency based. If you're seeing you're running the same type of call, seeing the same type of patient, let's let you test out and actually drive your training to something that's not just focused. It's not about tracking training. It is about focused training and making it so that we can pivot away from those buckets of hours and be less prescriptive and more thoughtful in the ways that we're actually telling people to train, whether that's at a department level, a company, or a unit level, or ultimately getting to that individualized level based on what they're doing in the field.
That's such a pet peeve of mine. It drove me crazy when I was at training academy. Was we would spend, we were tracking hours.
Yep.
We were just tracking hours. It had nothing to do with can that person actually do the skill or not.
Right.
It was just you got to sit here. And I've even seen online LMS systems where I did it the other day. I was doing some research stuff, and I was going through, and it literally made me wait. Like I had answered the questions, and it said, "Well, you're too fast. You got to sit here now for 3 minutes while we wait."
Right.
I'm like, "Come on, man."
Yeah, you've already proved that you can do
Yeah.
it. The data is already showing that your outcomes are strong. Why are we not focusing? And why does the technology needs to support us to say, here's where you need to focus? I mean, the future of training is not tracked; it's targeted.
Yeah, yeah. And we're headed that direction, huh?
We are.
with first two. So I'm excited about that. When I saw that we've got so much training talent on board, it's like, oh, we're just going to smash this thing. It's going to be fantastic. The documentation you mentioned, I know firefighters, we're kind of lukewarm on the documentation deal, particularly when it comes to some training records and stuff. But what's your perspective on the importance of that? I mean, I certainly know from my experience how important, but what's your take on the importance of getting those details?
Yeah, I mean, I think, how do we get better if we don't have the details? So again, like less, did we train, to did we improve? If we don't have that level of detail, how do we get there? So I also think we often think of training where it's the job of the training officer, the job of lieutenants or the captains to get that documentation, and it is. I've seen plenty of organizations who have one person who's responsible for getting that all in. If it works for them, great. But what do we have middle managers for if we can't get them to be held accountable? One of my isms, or someone's going to slap this on the back of a T-shirt for me, is like, we're holding. How much do we trust someone? How much are we holding them accountable for? As they progress up, it should be more and more. So those middle managers are responsible. But I think ultimately it is about, in order to get great documentation and records, glass half full. I think everybody wants to do the job well, but have we given them the tools to get there? So if we trust everybody at some basic level and we want to hold them accountable for certain things, have we actually enabled them to do that? Have we given them a dashboard that shows them, how their company's doing or how they're doing and how they can fill those gaps? Have we shown them, hey, you're supposed to be at 50%, but you're at 30%? I think we show them, oh, you're at 50%, but we don't show them how far they're tracking behind. Again, we've just got to get better about those tools that enable people to do their jobs. Because, again, ultimately, I like to think everybody wants to do a great job, but are they given the resources to do that?
Yeah, I mean, if you have to write it down, well, now I got to keep track of that. And, that makes it more complicated.
Yeah. And it's one thing when the resources didn't exist before, but they do. They do now. And again, I think they're more accessible. When I think we were at TSI last year in Oklahoma City, and, one of my pet peeves is for anything that you're using that's tech-enabled, any of your tech partners, they should be adding value for you year over year. And if they're not, you got to ask yourself. You should always be aware of what your options are, and if they're not adding value for you, you got to ask yourself if they're the right partner. I would rather have it be where I'm getting so much value, and I've got to keep up with it, than be chasing my partners down to be adding that value.
Yeah, and the records. It's unfortunate. I guess lessons I've learned the hard way through various traumatic events where it might not seem like a big deal that you captured that they mastered that skill or they lacked a proficiency in that skill, whatever the case was. But when things go wrong, that's some really critical data that we don't have. And being able to document that person did in fact have that skill. They were proficient. They demonstrated it. That protects everybody. That protects the firefighter, protects the fire department, and probably most importantly the family. Right. Of that firefighter. Are you seeing that? What's your take? What do you think?
Yeah, and if I boil that down, I say training is not a luxury, right? It's risk management. So if I think about if we're not investing in that readiness up front, we know that we pay for that, whether that's in, like you just said, injuries, more mistakes, or honestly outcomes that we can't take back.
Ooh, outcomes we can't take back.
Yeah.
I like that. Well, shame it's that way. So if, aside from the emergency response, the critical, what do you see, how do you treat, do you think we're putting the right emphasis on training with,
Oh gosh.
from a,
Yeah.
you got your fire departments. I know from watching, I've seen maybe 2 or 3 different tough financial seasons.
Yeah.
COVID aside, right? That was an anomaly unto itself. But there were times where, I think of like '08, where we were just trying not to lay off people the best we could. How do you feel like what emphasis should fire chiefs and training chiefs be placing on the technology piece that goes with it, right? Because, sometimes you have to make tough choices. How do you see us navigating that these days?
That's a great question. I'm smiling because I'm thinking, everything we do, it has to be customer focused and centric to the department's needs. Otherwise, what are we doing, right? So I'm thinking about some conversations I've had very recently, I guess, and even over the past, 2 decades, about departments who put training as one of the central pieces of their organization. They prioritize it. It's almost the heart of what they do for some of that. I'm thinking of a conversation very specifically with a department in Alabama who we were talking about creating a training program. And he was like, 2026? I've already got 2028's plan. And I said, first of all, sat back for a second, right? And I said, well, why, right? He said, well, requests for time off is actually driven by if you're on shift that day for training. So it's immediately denied if you're on shift that day and you're scheduled for training, and then you got to work around that. But I thought, wow, how forward are they? They're so well planned. Most departments are not there, though. They're here. They're trying to get to here. But in general, there's a real contrast between the priority of training and how we prioritize it, because we know it's so critical to what we do, yet it just often is getting squeezed in the day to when we can do it. And you and I spoke about this a little bit, and I think that's not intentional, right? That's just the result of I'm wearing multiple hats, I'm still on shift, and I'm also managing training for my agency, and I'm just trying to, again, it goes back to just maintaining compliance being the baseline for training being sufficient, right? It's training's one of the first things that gets cut if staffing or budget are tight. And I think the issue is then we go, okay, well, but seconds matter. We know this. The only way to perform quickly and safely is repetition and muscle memory. So it has to be at the heart of what we do.
Yeah. I feel bad almost when you look at what firefighters or fire officers are tasked with today. I mean, come on, man. This it's
Right.
like we can't. I don't know how we could possibly add another thing.
Yeah.
Because if you're looking at the training and you got to get your rig checked out. You got to deal with the training. You got all these different public
Right.
events you're supposed to be. It's plus you got to go some calls every now and then. There's all the emergency response.
Right.
It's really it's a tall order. So.
But there's a stigma too, right? Because so much of what we see says, and another chief that I was talking to, I think you and I know a lot of the same people,
We do.
right? But it's so funny, or a name drop. But they said something that stuck with me, and I guess in just a slightly different way. That's it's kind of one of my drivers now at this point, where they said we are often just focused on meeting a minimum standard. Like, where did this word minimum come into the play, right? Can we get that word out of our vocabulary? Because why are we striving to meet the minimum? It kind of blows my mind.
It's like low bid.
Right.
Why do you want to build a low bid firefighter? Why would
Right.
you do that? Yeah.
Yeah.
That was, I took a little heat back in the day when we first started putting our training program together. We talk about it in, the books and all those
Yep.
things. We did not start with the minimum certification in mind. We started with what we want the firefighter to be.
Yep.
Let's start there. We literally get the whiteboard out or the flip chart and talk about what are the key behaviors and capabilities and skills a firefighter should have. Okay, let's build a class to build a program around developing that. And we found that meeting the minimum standard was easy. It was no brainer. That just happened, right?
Yep.
Because we were working on the focus on the end product. And we actually had to change the documentation back then. It wasn't possible back in those days. You had to take firefighter 1 separate from firefighter 2.
Right. Yeah.
Which I was like, I get it, but if we're going to talk about ladders, man, let's just talk about ladders,
Right.
you know, and just get it all knocked out in one shot. And we ultimately were able to change that. Let's do some level setting. Talk about some like key terms and some things that I think are important that fire instructors or fire chiefs should make sure they're on the same page on. And one of those things I wanted to talk about, I hear it used interchangeably all the time, and it drives me a little crazy. The difference between certification and attendance.
Yeah. Oh, I like to throw a certificate of completion in there too.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. I got my certificate.
I got my certificates. Yeah. That one drives me absolutely nuts as well. But I think that goes back. This is why people, again, training is a rotating position, and people are just dying to get back to the field after they've been in training. Certification is the basis of so much of what we do. But is that the goal, right? It's my standard joke is I can make a salary off of people asking me to help with succession planning. This is one of the most frequent. Can you integrate with a records management system? Can you help with my succession planning? And I think certification plays into that. When I originally was tracking certifications back in the first platform, there's like 50 certifications. Most recently in the list I looked at, we're pushing 250. Right, this is why that people get confused. There's so many certifications, skills, cards. Cards is another one, right? Cards, credentials that people have to track, and to just meet that minimum standard and keep people compliant. That term drives me crazy.
Credentials. So that's another layer in there. I didn't even think about that. Right. So you've got those classes I've attended where you get I always kind of joke when I go to a major conference and they're giving out certificates of attendance. I always make sure to scan my own class.
Yeah.
So I have a certificate saying I attended my class. I always thought that was kind of my own little stupid humor. But, it doesn't really, it just means I was there.
It'll list yourself as the instructor to get
Yes.
instructor hours too.
I hit all the bases. And then you've got your there's a certificate of attendance, and there's a certification, which is, I guess, by definition, related to some standard, right?
Yep.
And then now we throw in the other credentials, the letters. You get the things behind the name, like the things, all the different stuff. What? Let's throw in another term, AHJ.
Yeah.
What does that mean to you?
I threw it out there a little earlier too. So if I zoom out and I think about training, I think about it as education, right? Whether that's initial or recert.
Okay.
And both of that is training, right? So that's like, again, the classes I'm going to take that may or may not lead to certification, which then may or may not lead to a license, and all of that gets wrapped up in a credential. But a credential is also not my new hire training plan, which is also what a department's trying to track. So I think all of those things factor in. AHJ, authority having jurisdiction. I always, to me, that's synonymous with the fire side of things. And I've seen a lot of states on the fire side put more requirements in place. Because I think if you think of yourself as, me, right? Like I don't work in the service, even though I've worked with the fire service for a long time. And the fact that in many states there's not any recert required for firefighter 1 or firefighter 2, or at least for years there wasn't. I think it might have been 2021 that Illinois was one of the first that did that, and now there's been probably a dozen others that followed suit. Before, it used to be those higher level certification levels, Officer 3, Officer 4, et cetera, that called for some of that recert. But that authority having jurisdiction, I personally love that because it lets you make it specific to your organization. It cuts through all the paperwork process. Right? If we think about training, it's inherently thought of as a lot of paperwork. So I would love to, again, get us away from that to just think about outcomes. How do we improve outcomes? Less, did we train and did it meet this accrediting entity's requirements? And more, did we improve?
So it sounds like we're leveraging technology to take the paperwork away. Like, the kind of, I don't want to say nuisance, but, from a training officer's perspective, it's kind of a pain in the neck that I have to report all these different things to different people to make everybody compliant with whatever. When really what I'm focused on is the outcome. I'm trying to get to a particular outcome, and this really gives us, I guess, some clarity about what the technology is supposed to do, right? It's supposed to take away the distractive things and let us focus on the actual output.
Right. Your training, if I think about it, your training platform or system should be a performance engine, not a paperwork system, which is inherently, I think, just what we've kind of grown to look at it as. It should be your performance engine, particularly when it's connected to all that other data of the day-to-day. Again, even just tracking your assets, right? What are, how much usage of some of these assets gotten or my equipment gotten? What are the things I'm not even touching? Do I need to do training on that? Because we own it, we paid for it, we bought it, it's sitting in the bays or on vehicles, but we're not using it. Okay, well, one, do we need to, why? And then two, okay, well, then we need to be prepared to actually use it in the field. So I think of that training partner or platform as the driver for your performance engine, right? It's like the engine in your car. Like, let's make sure it's powerful, but it's not just, again, it's not just your paperwork, pushing paper, but that is a lot of what training has become.
Performance engine, I had to write that down. That's good. We'll be keeping that one around. It reminds me of a system that we used to call it, or actually John Buckman is the chief that created it, critical skills. So he came up with this concept where use ladders for an example because it's easy to explain. How many times if you ask a firefighter, how many times in this period have you removed the ladder from the apparatus and placed it on a building? You'll probably get some numbers, right? Like they've probably done that.
Sure.
A few times. Okay, so if that's a high frequency event, then the training priority might be a little bit lower because we do it more often.
Right.
Like taking a blood pressure, we do that 15 times a day. So okay, we got that then.
Right.
How many times have you relocated that ladder for a rescue? Moving it rapidly from one window to another as part of a vent enter isolate search thing. That number's probably less. So by using that data, we use that in our performance engine. That's going to guide, that data will now guide the training content for the next period, right? If we find something that's a high risk, low frequency event through that performance engine, then I can then identify how to tailor my classes and content
Exactly.
to chase that. Love it. That's such a light year jump from the old Excel spreadsheet.
It is. And like I hear that less, but we certainly still hear it, that folks are on spreadsheets for some part of what they're doing, right? Skill sheets, perfect example. And I think, again, there are some other systems out there that are tracking skills and task books, but not in a way that's easy to adopt. The adoption with technology is one of the most critical things. And I think, if we think about how do we get tech adoption, I often think buy-in and including more people, right? We tend to, again, everyone's loaded up with different things that they have to do, but how do we include more people in the process up front, particularly our younger generations? And I only say that because there's so many of them, they love tech, and they want to be a part of the process, right? I've got my 3-year-old, and they say they just want to be a part of everything, right? They want to be up there cooking with you. They want to be up there doing everything. And I think it's not any different with your job. People want to be included and be a part of it. And if you're going to go and you're going to pay for something, and then you need hands to adopt it and to make it specific to you, you have to get buy-in early. You need that focus and the buy-in to actually get the value out of what you're going to do. And what you're going to use day to day.
That's pretty slick. And I ran into a fire department. I understand we have things coming in the pipeline for first due over the next year. And one of the fire department I'm thinking of, they're a large metro-sized fire department. They ran thousands of firefighters through some scenarios where they were able to, through great effort, I mean, they went through a big effort to capture certain data benchmarks, like how from air brake to forcible entry, from forcible entry or air brake to first line deployed, they ran all these things to a tactical scenario, and they were able to collect data. And I talked to them for a good hour one day about how did you even collect the data?
Yeah.
Like, what process did you use to even do that, and how to get reliable data? And they use like all the things that Microsoft ever made, and like all this different stuff to get this. But what they did was they discovered, as you would expect, like a bell curve, right? Like there were firefighters or fire companies and units that performed very well, and they were out on the tip of the bell curve. And then there was the bulk of the people that went through that exercise that were fine. Then there was the back half. There was that group to bringing up the rear that needed some remediation training.
Right.
So they were able to, as these guys described it, close the gap. They used that data to inform their training operations over the next year. They focused on the things what did the companies that perform well do? How can they inform the companies that need improvement?
Yep.
And then they made that training available over the course of the year. And then when they ran the drill again, when they ran a similar drill, they tested it and could actually prove that the training was effective.
Did we improve?
They closed the gap and they could prove it with data.
Yeah. I'm assuming, were they doing it manually? Yeah. That's going to be the difference, right? You hit on exactly what I think everyone wants us to solve. And actually, one of our common friends that I was in a conversation this morning with, I was planning to discuss it today, and the words came out of his mouth. He said, the company officers are just wondering, because that's great, right? They did that, and they're evaluating it at points in time, which I think anyone would even want to be doing that, right? Let's review the program quarterly, let's review the program semi-annually, whatever that is. Annually is what a lot of folks said. I think that was in our webinar too. How often are you reviewing your program? Annually. Great. So we go 12 months before we figure out what we need to change. What one of our friends said today is every day you want that company officer to be able to say, what do we train on next and why does it matter operationally? But that's what they have to get to. They have to get to being able to do that every day by having the tools that help them gather those insights, prioritize it, shuffle it around and say, what is my priority based on yesterday's data, last week's data, last quarter's data, right? That could be something saying the need for more RIT training based on all their Q4 incidents, right? Or even just, again, what have we done the last couple of weeks? Let me pull that time frame in even tighter. And what does my company need to train on today? That's where we're going. That's where we're going.
Yeah, tell me, what's in the pipeline? So
what's
cooking?
I think, again, if I step back, what technology lacks today is everything is focused on maintaining compliance, right? We're trying to get away from checking the box, but we're still tracking hours. We're still just checking boxes and making sure people stay certified. Most things that we use, well, one, we're in a dozen different systems, right? The firefighter loves that. They're logging into 12 different things, but they're not built to improve performance. So it doesn't help those company officers say, what am I going to do and why does it matter? So again, why I'm here and what we're focused on at First Do is enablement and action, and helping that technology put into the hands of those people responsible for training up front. And it's not just, what should my plan for my EMT recert or my paramedic recert, what should that include? But actually, through an easy back and forth exchange with either one of our AI tools or a builder, say, and here are my strategic goals, and they could do that. They could chunk it off. They could say, just give me my EMS goals for the year related to all my personnel, since we know that's still the biggest area of the calls that we're running and the patients that we're seeing is our EMS volume, right? Whatever the stat is, 85-90%, doesn't seem to change too much. Or they could go bigger and say, okay, also take into account all my compliance requirements for ISO, for state, federal, local, for ICS, for FEMA, all these different areas for NFPA, and essentially have our tools build that plan for them. And then go back and forth and say, okay, well, I want to tweak this. I want to focus a little bit more here, have it rebuild that training plan. Because again, when we did our webinar, everyone's here and they're just trying to get here. So that's the focus, is how do we provide tools that go so much further beyond checking the box, but actually helping them either recommend or automate, right? Everyone's got different comfort levels with their technology.
Right.
Recommend the training. And then they get to move things around based on their priority or interact with the tool to get it to state where they're at. But to be able to do that out of the box, We're introducing evaluations, a tool for evaluations. Task books will be coming soon. We've talked, I think, a little bit about that even before you and I joined the team at our Unify conference. But I was thinking even, okay, great. So now we've got a tool for evaluations. That is so much of what we do every day, those skill sheets. We're obviously going to give people the ability to load videos to that. Could we actually have the tools look at the videos for that person doing the evaluation, and before the evaluation's even done, suggest areas or call out the areas that need to be improved after that practice round before they get to their final timed evaluation? So again, the training has got to get smarter. Am I blowing your mind?
I'm like trying to hang on to that. Wow, wait a minute. That's like me trying to fix my golf swing. I've got the, thing
That's never
with
going to happen for me. Right?
Yeah,
I've got the clubs, but I'm just not going to play.
It's just not something that can be fixed, I think, when it comes to that for me. But so you're talking about leveraging. There's a couple of things that play here, I guess. With First Do, we have our data kind of all in one spot.
Yep.
So that gives us a unique perspective that I can, our AI can see things that otherwise would be invisible to anything else. But so you're saying I could, as a training officer, I could use the technology, I could use the artificial intelligence to help me crunch that data that exists and tailor my program, not only department-wide, but even by unit, right?
Yeah, and I think it would be twofold, right? Because, right, of course, we've got to be aware that there's other folks in this space. People are looking for a better way.
Right.
And so I heard a department say it just last week. We were at the Florida Fire Conference and then with a pretty large department in Florida right before that. And one of the chiefs said, the ultimate goal would be one, but the goal right now is just less, right? Again, they had a dozen things. They had homegrown, built a way to log into all these different systems, like a dashboard of sorts outside of that. So the immediate goal was just less. So I think our goal in the way that we build this and approach this, and I'll just put a little call out now, anyone that's using us or wants to use our platform, we'll love that beta feedback. I gave someone an initial show at what we were looking at today, and they'll be a beta customer, but we love our beta folks because that feedback is what helps us get it right, or more right on the first go.
Right.
But the goal would be to build a tool in such a way that if you had no data in the platform, which probably isn't the reality, they'll bring over data. Sure. But again, how clean is that data? So whether you're starting with just an initial data set or you're starting from scratch because you're like, we're going to maintain all those records, but we're just going to keep them in our SharePoint or whatever, that you could build something right out of the gate. And then, of course, it just gets smarter the more data you accumulate. But again, whether you were using incident data is huge, right? Whether that's fire or EMS, because you can train all you want, but how you perform in the field is really the true determinant of performance, and then you see those gaps. And so I think the incident data is important, again, which assets you're using the most frequently, and then what you need to train on. Our health and wellness module plays a role in that. Our command board, I was chatting with one of our folks about some applications for command for training, which I just love. But so you essentially get to pick your data sources. Because again, maybe you're only using slices of what we have to offer to help build your program. So again, right out the gate from scratch, no data around maybe, and then again, the folks that have been using us for a while, just something now where they can leverage all that and harness the power to say, all right, where are we doing well? What does that summary look like? And then make it actionable. Do I want to take the recommendations? Do I want to automate some of the recommendations? Hey, go build my whole plan.
I'm kind of jealous now. I had to do it the hard way all those years.
Yeah.
Now there's technology, I'd be scared to see what all I got wrong. Actually, but to look backwards, I'm sure we missed a bunch. That's just I'm just still, and like the command function. That's something that I've learned about First Do that I didn't know was like, man, there really is a solid command function out there that really is useful in the training environment.
Yep.
Our
drills, our evolutions.
Yeah, all based on templates, basically tactical templates that you build into things. So that all that connectivity really is pretty remarkable. But I love the AI thing, man. To look back and nobody's touched this tool in months. Either we don't need the tool, or we should probably get it out and train on it because if it's not in our focus.
Well, and then it ties into policy and procedure.
Yeah.
So again, think about those evaluations. And then looking at the documents that are loaded and making some inferences to say, oh, missed this step or didn't do this correctly, right? Again, all of that is manual right now. You have to know that so well. And we document policy compliance. I always say we're a litigious society, right? So like it's so far beyond just did you do it? You have to acknowledge, you have to have some way to say, which is just another aspect of the training program. Well, how do you know that they knew how to apply that in a real world scenario? So it is, the testing or that portion of it. But I think it applies, in reverse too, to say, okay, well, maybe after everything we're seeing, we need to be doing things a little bit differently. Like, let's make some changes to our policies or procedures based on what we're seeing when we train or when we're in the field.
Thinking of it now, it's actually like we have often thought of training as a one-way communication pipeline, right? Like training is, we create it, it goes out. But it sounds like with this technology and with the capabilities that First U has now, it's a two-way conversation. The operations are informing the training program, and the training program is informing the operations. Yeah. It's a loop.
Yeah. Someone once said, there's a lot of unintended consequences. They are often very positive of the work that you do, right? I think the other one is showing us from this whole analysis of what we do, right? Okay, great. So we've got EMS covered. We're meeting our requirements. We're training. We've got enough content to cover us in these areas. Okay, but we have nothing. We don't train in this area at all, right? I mean, that could be a result of that too. And I think that, again, we often think of, you're in the world of content because you write, you teach, instruct, now hosting a podcast. So you're all over content. But we tend to focus content in the areas that meet the needs of like the largest group. Right. But there's so many areas of content that, it's a sliver of people, or it's like like you said, like it's something we don't see frequently. Okay, well, does training even exist there? Yeah. Let's go build it. Let's create it so that we're preparing our folks for what they're going to see in the field.
Remarkable. I'm excited to see all that. And you mentioned task books. Explain to people when you say task book, what do you mean? Because there's several different definitions.
Yeah, and I searched this recently because I wanted to know how many states had actually task books, solidified as a part of what they do across their area. And there's not a lot, right? I think task books is a term that we've seen people use more recently. But the reality is most folks probably have task books that they're not calling task books. It's an accumulation of these skills that then we capture a lot of signatures. We love our signatures and multiple levels of signatures. That's one of our favorite things to capture, 10 levels of signatures. So it's an accumulation of those skills that are required to progress to the next level with a series of sign-offs. And again, I think most departments are doing that today. They're just not organizing it in a formal task book, but I hear that more and more departments are going that direction, which is why the evaluations piece is the first piece we're getting out the door, and we'll collect and tweak and get feedback on that, and then pull that into, give the capacity or capability to pull that into a task book.
So some examples like where I came from, the department I worked for before, we had a probationary firefighter program. Would meet your
officer program.
It's a task book, basically.
Your instructor program.
Yeah, acting officer is a common one. Where you have to meet certain criteria to get to that, to gain that blessing. To be the acting officer or whatever. Yeah,
California, state of California. I don't know if they were the first, but they're certainly the first state that mentioned task books to me at their joint apprenticeship meeting or event. They were so focused on journeyman and apprenticeship and task books related to progressing up through the different ranks and certifications for the things you're going to take on. So again, I don't know if they were the first, but they've certainly set some standard with what task books look like, and many others have followed suit.
I'm really excited about this part because it's going to be cool to see all the data in one place. It's going to be cool to see what we can leverage AI on that, and then to inform training operations in such a way that's nothing. I couldn't conceive that back, when I was actually at the academy. But to see it happen now is really remarkable. Yeah. Let me pick your brain about a few other things. Kind of state of the union sort of stuff.
Sure.
One of the things, and it's funny. One of my buddies was on the governing board of fire certification in the state I lived in. We'll keep it very generic.
Yeah.
And he moved to another state to work in another place, maybe near where we are, but we won't name names. He was amazed that he got zero portability because the certifications that he had multiple seals on them.
Yeah.
And then he showed up someplace else and nobody cared. Like
Right.
you had to go back to the beginning. Where are we at in the world of portability, as what we tend to call it?
So I think on the EMS side of things, we've made some progress with the EMS Compact and how many states have adopted that for that actual purpose of portability. So I love to see that. And that's recent, right? That's kind of crazy, but that's recent. On the fire side of things, because I think this is where people get confused as well with the online training world. And they say, "Oh, are you IFSAC or Pro Board accredited?" Right? It's like, well, the requirements to be IFSAC Pro Board accredited will pretty much always eliminate online training providers as it stands today. So would love to see that change, but it would always have to be in partnership with someone doing something face to face. Gosh, again, if we go back to competency,
Yeah.
that's applicable everywhere. If we can prove that we know how to do this and we've got the data to back that up, why are we wasting time, right? In some ways, you could probably say it's a little political.
Well, that's what I was going to ask. I was going to say, the resistance we see, I've seen it before, where people have shut down certain programs or certain ideas,
Yeah.
mostly because they just either didn't, it was a change that
Right.
they didn't want to make, or, they didn't, it was creeping into their backyard, or, for whatever reason.
Right.
But it's interesting that I think with the technology, I would love to hear your opinion. I think the technology is going to cause that to be an untenable position, probably going forward, 10 years from now. I don't know how you do that.
I think one of the things working against us is if you think about those authorities right now, right? Those state offices, the fire marshal, they're all named similarly, but called something different. And then on the EMS side, where we've made some progress, those are probably some of the most understaffed groups, and that's the challenge. Is you get turnover, you have new people in there, and you're starting from scratch. And it's similar in some ways with some of our associations or groups that we work with in the fire service too. We've only got people in positions for so long to enact real change. So in that way, it ends up being, kind of political, because you're almost lobbying to try to move some of these things forward. I think all of it, right? Again, the pace. I think about First Due, we move so fast, but I also think just in general, the pace of everything is moving so fast. And again, our younger generations are going to be a forcing function for some of this. They're going to push us to a place where they're challenging us on why things are the way they are, and for good reason. So hopefully, I don't know what that looks like, the certification portability, but it's not going to stay the same.
Yeah. I don't see how I could, it's just not a tenable place to be with the technology. And
well, especially not when recruitment is one of the biggest challenges today. Maybe not in some areas, but in general, right? I remember when my cousin got on the job in Texas, he paid his own way through most of his program and certifications just to get on the job, because there were so many people fighting for that position. And now today we're just, throwing the lassos out, trying to get people in.
It comes in waves, I was trying to get on the job in the 90s, and you would show up and there'd be 3,000 people there for 20 spots.
Right.
It was insane.
Well, shift life is hard. We have to acknowledge that.
Now it's, like you said, we were going crazy to recruit people, but that doesn't mean that pendulum doesn't shift back,
Yep.
So it certainly will change. The other thing I was curious about your perspective on was the way we do standards. Like we're cycling NFPA standards, which guides most of the training curriculums. Was served on those committees for a lot of years. At a 5-year cycle, when you put in the technology and you put in the changes that are happening in the field, and then the publications that go with it. Right? Like my department was in that. I literally was in a place where I had to write my own promotional exams. As scary as that is, we had to do it ourselves because our operational context was not contained in any curriculum. We were consistent with the research, but not consistent with the curriculum. Mm-hmm. So we just said, look, we're going to stay with the research, right? We're going to let the other thing catch up. What do you think the state of the industry is? How do you see, what's the next 10 years look like from your perspective on it? It just seems like it's impossible to maintain.
Yeah. So I think I might answer this in a different way, right? Only because I'm thinking of, I've been blessed to work at like only a few places in my last 20 years. I think it all goes back to the culture of the leadership and what they are, how they are embracing that technology and how they then rapidly make the change. And I'll use, I think you and I talked about this from when we started, we got added to our AI office hours.
Yeah.
And, I was like, I've got the things that our team is doing across all of the different functions, right? Sales, technology, product, HR, you name it, right? I've seen various levels. I've seen, we won't name names, but I've seen organizations who are just like, ew. Well, we know it's there, right? We know that this technology is out there. Let's see what happens with it. And I was listening to another podcast that said, I think it was Mel Robbins. She had a guest, and the guest said, if the organization that you're working at is not fully embracing AI, go get another job. Yeah. And I kind of sat back and thought, wow, that's kind of bold, right? And she said, yeah, that's privileged for sure. But the reality is those skills, and I just saw it on a resume today, those skills, if you don't have them, are going to become, again, expected. So I think, again, you think about how we enact change, it goes back to that leadership and culture, which in the fire service we so often talk about, we love to talk about. But the leaders who are actually embracing that, again, I'll take providing tools, giving, company chat GPT, that is amazing, but actually showing applicability and pulling people together and driving things forward and sharing use cases, like that's I think that's why we're advancing so much, but other organizations have to do that, and that comes from leadership and culture.
Yeah. It'll be interesting to watch over the next little bit because I think the mousetrap we had built over the decades was fine for then, right. But today it's a much different scenario, and I don't know what the answers are, but I'm excited to be part of the First Do program because my wife asked me the other day, she goes, "Who are you talking to in there?" I was, "It's me and the AI talking."
That's
she goes,
great.
"You're talking to the AI?" I'm like, "Yeah, I'm going to talk. It's easier than typing. I just talk to it." And she's like, "Wow, it's I was explaining to her what that's all about." Yeah. I mean, it's amazing how fast.
What were you working on?
I don't know. Who knows? It was something to do with a case study or something, and it's not that. And I would see. I think we probably have a similar opinion about it, but it's not that It's not that it's making me lazy. It's a force multiplier.
Absolutely. It's going to be a self-fulfilling prophecy otherwise, right? If you're just, to your point, like if you're using it in a lazy way, of course it's going to tell you what you want to hear, right. Which, how fun is that? It's not very fun, right? So I think that's the piece that's missing right now. And I know there are some great groups and some great training coming out around that because we have to learn how to use it. And then that means spending time with it. But it also, again, it ties back to that culture. But writing a prompt. How do I write a prompt? I mean, I've gone light years in the last 3 months on my prompts.
Me too.
Yeah. So I think, again, that's to your point. It's a force multiplier.
Yeah, and then to have it have the capability for it to assist you with your training program. That's whiz bang. And then to have it built in and baked in to my system I use. It's not like an add-on thing. You know what I mean? You can. It's in there. It's in the machine. So that's a remarkable capability. Yeah. Before we close that, I want to ask one more question. Sure. It's my favorite thing, the thing I think about most when I think about training. Okay. How important is it? And I guess I'm talking about the initial certification. In my brain, I remember back. I've got a state form in front of me with my pen, right. And I'm getting ready to sign my name on this recruit's. When I sign this paper, they're a certified firefighter. You know, my signature is going to be the one that's going to carry that weight. And I always would. There was more than one occasion where I would sit there and I looked at the paper and I was like, I don't know, man. You know, I'm thinking, I don't know where this firefighter is going to go. I don't know what they're going to be involved in. I don't know what they're going to face in their career and what's going to happen. And do I sign this? You know, do I? You know, there's some that it was obvious. It was like, yes, absolutely. I can't sign this thing fast enough for that person. They're fantastic. And then there was the ones where I sat for a minute and thought about it. And you know what the awkward spot for training officers is because how can I not sign it?
Sure.
Right? I have to. How could I use the technology and the data and the things that you and your team are creating at First Due? How can you back me up on this signature? Yeah. Like what if I have question?
Yeah, but that's the individualized piece.
Right.
That's the individualized piece. You know, I think for anyone who's a manager who manages people, right, which is hard. Like, that's a hard job. We have to acknowledge that, to be a manager of people, because what you're talking about is that every single one of us are different, and every single one of us are motivated in different ways, yet we're cookie cutter.
Yeah.
Right? Again, I'm just meeting that minimum standard. And do I, as a company officer or an instructor, have the tools to help me be more specific with this person that I'm seeing is struggling?
Right.
So I presented to a group, this is one of my favorite things. I presented to a group, a committee that's focused on technology, and I don't hear this a lot anymore, which I sort of love, but someone said, well, what you're talking about is just going to replace, do you think it's going to replace the training officer? I mean, I heard that 20 years ago about online training. I would love to know if that's happened. Please email me.
I haven't seen it.
Yeah. But so, you know, again, I think the people who are going to be out of jobs are the training officers or the leaders who are not embracing the technology, because they're more efficient, they've gained time to their day, they're more targeted, and they can help the person that's struggling faster, better, easier to get them through the program or make that decision and feel good about where they're at. I mean, I think that's what it's going to have to come down to is, again, that individualized approach helps you feel really good about that signature. That's where we've got to get.
That's amazing. So kind of in a nutshell, the First Due capabilities now, when it comes to training, it's going to use all the data in the system that there is to have. I mean, all the things from the equipment to the personnel to the scheduling to all of it.
Right.
To be able to guide my training program that's in a proficient, you know, way that increases proficiency tactically and functionally on the fire ground. And then I think is important to training officers is back me up when I have to put my name on the line.
I think we were scared about video in the past.
Yeah.
Video is going to, right? Video, we're going to have that, capture the video, find the gaps, improve the performance, the outcomes, because then you feel really good about, one, you've impacted that person's ability to perform in the field, but you've also helped the department, you've lowered your risk. Again, training isn't a luxury, it's risk management. And then I think that that unintended consequence is really helping the people who are responsible in whatever position that is throughout the department to feel good about what they're doing, that they're not second-guessing their decisions.
And with all the training partners we have, the content, all the things, right? It's a one-stop shop. That's amazing. I really appreciate you. I'm thrilled that you're on the team.
Same.
And I can't wait.
Back at you.
Man, we're going to do some cool stuff in the training world. This is going to be awesome. I'm really thrilled.
Yeah,
so thank you. Thanks for coming to sit at the table with us.
Yeah, thanks for having me. We'll check back in, I hope, later this year, and we'll talk about where we're at. But it's coming.
Absolutely. Thank you, Amanda. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Eddie.
That is our conversation today on the First Due Table Talk podcast. Thank you for joining us at the table here. And if you found this valuable, be sure to share it online. You know, give us the like, the bell, all the things to follow us on social media and that, so you get the next episode when it comes out. And if you're interested more in what we're talking about, it's from all the various components of the First Due platform. It's amazing. You can always go to firstdue.com and get more information there as well. So we'll be back next time with another episode. Thanks for pulling up a seat at the table. We'll see you at the next shift. Take care.
Take care.